The forest breathes as if alive. The crackle of the campfire breaks the stillness, small sparks rising like fleeting spirits into the moonless sky. The narrator's voice is soft at first, the kind that makes you lean in to hear, as if the sound itself might vanish if spoken too loud. Around him, the night is deep and ancient, filled with the distant sounds of shifting branches and whispering wind weaving through the pines. The flames cast long shadows that twist and dance across the faces of unseen listeners. It feels warm at first, comforting even, that familiar glow of a fire in the wild, but the longer you stare into it, the more it begins to feel wrong, as if something just beyond the light is waiting for the dark to grow thicker. The narrator's eyes reflect the embers. He sits close, a hood pulled up to shield against the chill. You can almost see the years in his face, not from age, but from memory. The tone in his voice carries the weight of someone who has returned to a place he swore he'd never see again. He speaks with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each word soaked in nostalgia and unease. He tells us that there are places in these woods where time folds over itself, where campfires never go out and voices linger long after the people who made them are gone. They say the woods never forget the screams, he murmurs, his voice cracking slightly, as if he's not quoting a legend, but remembering one. The camera moves through the trees, showing glimpses of forgotten campsites. A torn sleeping bag half buried in dirt, a rusted lantern swinging gently from a branch, a cooler turned on its side with old claw marks across the lid. Every frame feels heavy with silence. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once, then nothing. The forest seems to be listening, holding its breath, waiting for the next word. The narrator speaks of nights where the air feels too still, when the fire burns blue for no reason, when you swear you hear someone walking just behind you but every time you turn, there's nothing but black. His tone shifts slightly, from storytelling to confession. He admits that he used to come here often, that the forest once felt like home, but something changed. He doesn't say what, only that he started waking up to find footprints circling his tent. The audience can hear the faint sound of twigs snapping in the background, subtle, almost imagined. The crackle of the fire grows louder, like it's trying to drown something out. He tells us he stopped camping after one night, the night the forest spoke back. The words hang heavy in the air, swallowed by the wind. Visually, the scene becomes tighter. The camera closes in on his face, sweat glistening at his temple despite the cold. The shadows behind him shift slightly, too synchronized to be random. The fire pops, sending sparks toward the camera. His eyes flick toward the sound, and for a moment, he looks genuinely afraid, though he smiles to cover it. "Maybe it's better you don't believe me," he says softly, "because the ones who do, they never come back out here again." His hand reaches toward the fire, tossing in another log. The flames surge, illuminating something faint in the trees. A figure, or maybe just a trick of light. It's there for only a second, but long enough for your stomach to drop. The forest sound fades back in. Wind through dead leaves, water trickling somewhere unseen, the rhythmic creak of a branch. The narrator's voice grows quieter, almost a whisper. He speaks directly to the listener now, no longer telling a story but issuing a warning. "Every story I'm about to tell happened out here," he says, his words slow, trembling slightly. "And some say the woods still remember them." The camera begins to pull back, the fire shrinking to a distant flicker surrounded by a sea of darkness. The whispering of wind begins to sound almost like words. Faint, fragmented, impossible to make out but undeniably human. The scene ends with a final gust of wind that snuffs the fire out completely, plunging everything into black. For a brief heartbeat, there is nothing. Then, the faint echo of footsteps in leaves, too close, too deliberate. A low, distorted breath seeps through the silence. The narrator's voice, now distant and echoing, delivers the final line of the prologue. "If you ever find yourself alone out here at night, remember, you're not." The sound of crackling fire morphs into a cold wind sweeping through branches, signaling the beginning of the first story. The tone shifts from eerie calm to mounting dread, setting the stage for the horrors that lie ahead. The forest road wound endlessly into the dark, the headlights of the old SUV cutting through sheets of mist that clung to the pines like cobwebs. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles pale under the soft glow of the dashboard. Beside him, Mia scrolled through her phone, trying to find signal, frustration flickering across her face. They had driven hours away from the city for this. For peace, for escape, for a weekend to mend what months of silence and unspoken tension had broken between them. But as the GPS lost its voice and the signal bars vanished, the woods swallowed them whole. The sun had fallen behind the mountains an hour ago, and now the world outside the windshield existed only in fragments. The occasional white birch flashing past, the shapes of trees leaning too close, and the faint reflection of Mia's tired eyes in the window. "We should have reached the campground by now," she murmured. Ethan forced a smile, though his jaw was tight. "It's probably just over the ridge. Let's find a flat spot and set up for the night." His voice was calm, but his tone carried that uneasy edge that always came when he tried too hard to sound sure of himself. They pulled into a clearing off the road, a small space surrounded by towering evergreens. The ground was soft with moss and pine needles, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Ethan stepped out first, breathing in the cold night, his flashlight beam dancing across the clearing. "Perfect spot," he said, more to convince himself than her. Mia followed, wrapping her jacket tighter around her. The forest was unnervingly quiet. No crickets, no distant birds, just the low hum of the wind threading through branches. Together, they unpacked their tent, the nylon whispering as it took shape under trembling hands. It was while gathering firewood that they saw it, the other campsite. Ethan's flashlight caught a glint of metal beyond the trees. As they drew closer, their breath turned visible in the cold. There, in a hollow, sat a full camp setup. A tent still standing, a cold fire pit with half-burned logs, and a cooler half-buried in leaves. A lantern hung from a branch above, swaying gently though there was no wind. "Hello," Ethan called, his voice echoing strangely. No answer. Mia's voice was barely a whisper. Maybe they went hiking? But something about it felt wrong, too quiet, too recent. The chairs around the fire were still upright, cups half full of rainwater, clothes hanging from a nearby line. Everything looked frozen mid-moment, as if whoever was here had simply vanished. Ethan crouched near the tent flap, calling out again before unzipping it. Inside, sleeping bags were laid out neatly, a flashlight lying beside them, its beam dead. He found a phone too, battery drained, screen cracked. Mia stood behind him, one hand covering her mouth. "Let's just go back," she said. But he ignored her, scanning the ground for footprints. There were plenty, human, leading away from the tent, deeper into the forest, and then nothing. The trail stopped abruptly, like they'd been lifted straight off the earth. He stared at the spot for too long, a chill crawling down his neck. They returned to their own tent as the night deepened, the sense of wrongness lingering. The fire burned weakly between them. Neither spoke much while they ate, and the silence felt heavy, the kind that made you aware of every heartbeat. Eventually, Mia whispered, "Do you think something happened to them?" Ethan didn't answer right away. The fire popped, and sparks rose into the black. "Maybe," he said softly, eyes fixed on the tree line. "Maybe they just got lost." But in the pause that followed, a faint sound drifted from the woods, a low murmur, like distant voices. First, it was easy to dismiss. The mind plays tricks in the wilderness. But as the night stretched on, the voices grew clearer. They weren't random. They were speaking words, familiar ones. Ethan frowned, sitting up. The sound came from somewhere near the abandoned campsite. He listened closely, realizing with a slow, creeping horror that the voices were speaking his name. Not once, but twice. "Ethan!" The whisper came again, soft, echoing, and wrong, like his own voice played back through a broken radio. Mia sat up, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The voice came again, but this time it said hers. They froze, staring into the black trees beyond the glow of their fire. The sound of leaves shifting grew louder, closer. Ethan grabbed his flashlight, sweeping it across the clearing, but the beam hit nothing. just endless trunks and fog. The whispering stopped. The forest went silent again. So silent it hurt to breathe. Ethan forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Probably the wind," he said. But even as he said it, they both knew the truth. The wind doesn't say your name. They retreated into the tent, zipping it up tight. The nylon walls felt paper-thin against the weight of the dark pressing in. Mia sat with her knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the zipper. Outside, something moved. Slow, deliberate steps circling the tent. The crunch of leaves came closer, then stopped right at the entrance. For a long time, there was nothing, just their breathing, fast and shallow. Then, softly, the zipper shifted. It slid upward a few inches, then stopped. Ethan lunged, grabbing it from the inside, holding it shut. "Go away!" he shouted into the dark, his voice breaking. Silence answered. The forest waited. Somewhere in that silence, a faint whisper floated back. His own voice repeating the same words he'd just said. Then footsteps retreated, vanishing into the night. The two sat there in stunned silence until dawn began to tint the sky pale gray. When they finally emerged, the forest looked ordinary again, almost peaceful. But where the zipper had moved, there were smears of dirt, like someone's fingertips had dragged along the fabric. As they packed up to leave, Mia turned toward the path where the abandoned campsite had been. It was gone. Not a trace of it, no tent, no cooler, not even footprints. Just untouched forest, as if it had never existed. Ethan stared for a long moment, then whispered, "Maybe it was never there." But deep down, both of them knew. Something had watched them all night, something that now knew their names. The storm had already rolled in by the time the ranger began his final patrol. The sky was a bruised shade of gray, rumbling with distant thunder that seemed to echo through the valleys. Rain slicked the narrow dirt path leading up to Firewatch Tower 9, a skeletal structure that leaned slightly with age, its wooden steps groaning under each bootfall. The ranger's name was Daniel Harker, a man in his late 40s who'd spent half his life walking these woods. He wasn't afraid of storms, or the dark, or the forest itself. But lately, he'd begun to fear what the silence meant, the kind that swallowed sound whole. The radio on his belt crackled softly, a voice checking in from the main station. "Tower 9, status?" Daniel pressed the button, speaking over the rain. "Just finishing the loop. Weather's rough, but all quiet up here." His words were steady, professional, but there was a hint of fatigue, the kind that sits heavy in the chest. He'd been covering double shifts since the disappearances started. Hikers, campers, even a deputy who'd come to investigate. Each time, the reports ended the same. Last seen near Tower 9. He reached the base of the tower and looked up. The top was lost in fog. The metal cables rattled in the wind, making an eerie metallic hum. As he climbed, he thought about the note taped above his desk, the one written by his partner, Ellie, before she quit. "I can't keep listening to the forest at night. It knows my name." He'd laughed when she said it, but now, standing halfway up the tower with rain pelting his face, her words echoed in his head. Inside the small cabin at the top, everything was still. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and damp wood. Maps of the park were pinned to the walls, dotted with red circles marking the disappearance sites. Daniel hung his coat on the rack, wiped the condensation from the window, and took a deep breath. He could see nothing beyond the fog, just endless white. He flipped open his patrol log and began to record. October 3rd, 10:14 p.m. Visibility low, wind high. Heard movement along the ridge near the old trailhead earlier, investigating at first light. His voice was calm, though his hands trembled slightly. Hours passed. The rain softened into a steady drizzle. The forest below was invisible, but every so often, he thought he saw something move in the mist. A flicker of shadow, or maybe a trick of the light. The radio hissed again. "Tower 9, copy?" The voice was faint this time, distorted. He leaned closer. "Copy, this is Tower 9. Silence." Then, faintly, his own voice came back. "Copy, this is Tower 9. He froze. The sound was identical. Pitch, rhythm, even the slight rasp in his throat. He turned off the radio, then stared at it for a long time. Maybe interference. Maybe someone nearby was playing a prank. But there were no other towers operational tonight. He opened the log again, scribbling quickly. Unexplained radio echo, possible frequency bleed. His handwriting shook. At 11:42 p.m., something hit the side of the tower. Not hard, but sharp. A distinct thud against the metal supports. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside into the cold. The fog had thickened, curling around the tower's legs. The beam of his flashlight illuminated only a few feet ahead. He scanned the ground below, calling out, "Who's there?" The only response was the echo of his own voice, muted by the fog. Then came another sound, the faint scrape of boots on metal stairs below him. Someone was climbing. He leaned over the railing, shining the light downward, but saw nothing except a swirl of mist. "This is restricted," he shouted. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped halfway up, then silence. He waited, listening, but all he could hear was the wind sighing through the beams. Finally, he turned to go back inside and froze. The radio on his desk had come back on by itself. Static filled the air, followed by a single word whispered through the speaker. "Daniel." He felt the hair on his neck rise. No one was supposed to know his first name over the open channel. He stepped toward the radio slowly, the floorboards creaking under his boots. "Who is this?" he demanded, voice low and steady. Static answered. Then, the same word again, softer, almost pleading. "Daniel." He turned off the radio, unplugged it, and sat down heavily in the old wooden chair. The tower swayed slightly in the wind. He pressed his palms against his temples, breathing slow. He told himself it was just stress, exhaustion. But then he noticed something that froze him completely. Footprints on the floor. Wet, fresh footprints. They started at the door, led across the room, and stopped right behind his chair. He turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in his hand, but there was nothing there. The sound of breathing filled the room, deep and slow, but not his. It was right behind him. He spun around, empty space. His flashlight flickered once, twice, then went dead. Darkness closed in, and for a few seconds, he could hear only rain and the pounding of his own heart. Then, faintly, the radio came alive again, though it was still unplugged. His own voice spoke from it, soft and broken. "If anyone finds this, don't come look." The sentence cut off abruptly, the static rising like a scream. Outside, lightning flashed, revealing the shape of a figure standing at the bottom of the tower. Looking up, Daniel's breath hitched. The light faded, and when it flashed again, the figure was gone. Only the whisper of wind remained. The camera would linger here, panning over the empty tower, the coffee cup still steaming, the patrol log open, the pen rolling slowly across the table. The final radio crackle fades into silence, and then into the soft hum of wind. Somewhere in that static, just barely audible, Daniel's voice whispers again, "Don't come looking." The storm continues, indifferent, swallowing the tower whole in fog as the scene transitions to the next story. The fire burned low, the wood hissing as the last of the moisture cooked out of it. Smoke curled lazily upward into the night sky, vanishing into a blackness so deep it seemed to devour the stars. For friends sat in a loose circle around the flames, their faces half-lit and flickering. Jake, Tom, Lila, and Mason. They had been coming to this clearing every summer since they were kids, a tradition that had begun with laughter and ghost stories, but tonight carried a strange heaviness. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe the passing years, or maybe the unspoken thought that this might be the last time. Tom raised his beer and grinned through the haze of smoke. "To another year we survived adulthood," he said. The others laughed, but it was hollow. Lila leaned forward, poking at the embers with a stick. "Do you ever think we'll still be doing this in 10 years? She asked quietly. Jake shrugged. "If Mason brings the whiskey, sure." The group chuckled, but Mason didn't smile. He stared into the fire like he was seeing something else, something moving in its reflection. Later, As the night deepened and the fire burned down to a dull orange glow, Tom broke the silence again. "Let's make a pact," he said suddenly. "Every year, no matter what happens, we come back here. Even if we've got jobs, kids, bad knees, we make time for this. Same day, same place." His tone was playful, but his eyes were serious. Lila smiled faintly. "You're drunk," she teased. "Yeah, maybe," he replied. "But I mean it." Mason finally spoke, his voice low. "And what if one of us can't?" Tom smirked. "Then the rest of us come anyway. For them." He raised his beer again, and the others hesitated before clinking cans. The sound was small and final, swallowed by the vast quiet of the forest. The night stretched long after that, filled with laughter and old stories, the kind that always end in nostalgia. But somewhere between midnight and dawn, the laughter faded, and the wind began to sound like voices moving through the trees. When morning came, the clearing was silent. The fire was cold. The pact was sealed in memory, and over time, memory blurred. Years passed. One by one, the four drifted apart. Life happened, as it always does. Jobs, distance, and silence. Then, one winter, Tom died in a car crash. The following spring, Lila stopped answering calls. Mason and Jake promised each other they'd keep the pact anyway. But the next year, Mason never showed. Jake waited until the fire went out, then packed up alone. The year after that, he came back again, still alone. And again, until 10 years had gone by, and he was the last one left. Now, he sat in that same clearing, the forest around him colder and quieter than he remembered. His beard had grown gray, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged the firewood. The wind carried the faint smell of rain. He placed 4 chairs around the fire just like before, one for each of them. He poured whiskey into 4 tin cups, setting them carefully in front of each empty seat. "To another year," he whispered, voice cracking. The flames flickered weakly in the damp air. "I kept the pact." The firelight danced across the empty chairs, and for a moment, he thought he saw shadows sitting there, faint outlines in the smoke, shifting like figures half seen through fog. Jake smiled bitterly. "You'd all laugh if you saw me talking to the air," he said. "But I guess I'd rather talk to ghosts than be alone." The forest was still, save for the low hum of crickets. Then, faintly, a laugh echoed from the dark. It was soft, familiar. Jake froze. He turned his head toward the sound. "Tom," he whispered. No answer. The fire hissed, and the smoke began to curl in odd patterns, forming thin trails that twisted toward the chairs. Another sound, this time from behind him. A woman's giggle, delicate, just like Lila's. He stood slowly, heart pounding. The laughter grew, faint and overlapping, as if coming from all sides at once. "You kept the pact," a voice whispered. It was Mason's voice, unmistakable. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Mason!" He stepped closer to the fire. The air had grown heavy, the warmth replaced by a chill that bit through his jacket. The whiskey cups rattled softly on the ground. One tipped over on its own, spilling amber liquid into the dirt. Jake knelt beside it, his hands shaking. "You're not real," he muttered. But then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, he saw movement, shapes forming between the trees, faint outlines that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. The laughter had stopped. Now there was only breathing. Slow. Close. The fire burned lower, and the light dimmed until the forest swallowed half the clearing. Jake's eyes darted to the empty chairs. They weren't empty anymore. Faint figures sat there, not fully formed, but recognizable. Tom's broad shoulders, Lila's tilted head, Mason's silhouette leaning forward toward the fire. They sat in silence, just watching him. Jake couldn't move. He wanted to run, but something in his chest told him to stay. His mouth trembled. "I missed you," he whispered. The figure that looked like Tom smiled, and the fire flared, the flames stretching unnaturally high for a moment. In that light, their faces were clear, pale, hollow-eyed, burned by time. Lila's hair hung in wet clumps. Mason's mouth opened slightly, and the whisper returned, layered, echoing. You kept the pact. The wind roared suddenly, sending sparks spiraling upward. The fire exploded with light, and Jake stumbled back. When the light dimmed again, the chairs were empty. The whiskey cups were gone. The clearing was silent once more, save for the faint rustle of the trees. Jake stood there, breathing hard, tears glinting in the firelight. He sat back down, alone again, staring into the flames. Yeah, he whispered to the night. I kept it. Behind him, the faint sound of laughter rose once more, soft, familiar, and wrong. The camera would linger on the fire, where foreshadows flicker briefly across the ground, seated together once again. The sound of their laughter carries into the darkness, blending with the wind until it becomes something else entirely. A whisper that follows the listener as the scene fades away. The sky was already bruising into twilight when the siblings arrived at the old campsite. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine, the kind of smell that carries memories whether you want them or not. Claire stepped out of the car first, her boots sinking into the soft ground. Behind her, her younger brother Nathan stretched his arms, looking around with a nostalgic half-smile. It looks smaller, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the tree line where the forest swallowed the horizon, a place she hadn't seen since she was 12. The last time they had been here, their parents were still alive. The campsite looked untouched by time. The rusted fire pit still sat in the center of the clearing, half buried in leaves. The old wooden sign with their father's initials carved into it leaned against a stump, worn smooth by rain and sun. Nathan walked over and brushed his hand along the wood, his smile fading. "He made this our second home," he said. Claire knelt by the fire pit, tracing a finger through the ash. "And it took them from us." Her voice cracked, the memory pressing down like weight on her chest. They set up their tent in silence as the light faded. Nathan tried to fill the air with small talk. How the drive wasn't so bad, how the air smelled cleaner out here. But Claire barely responded. She was distant, her mind somewhere else. When the fire was finally built, its light flickered across their faces, casting the illusion that they were children again, laughing by the flames with their parents roasting marshmallows. For a moment, it felt like they had come back in time. But then, the woods reminded them where they really were, the wind sighing through the branches in a tone too low, too human. They ate in silence, the fire popping and crackling as night deepened. Somewhere far away, a creek murmured, the water catching the moonlight through the trees. Nathan looked toward it, his expression softening. "Remember the sound?" he asked. "Dad used to say the creek talked to him when he couldn't sleep." Claire nodded. "He said it carried secrets," she murmured. The forest around them seemed to listen. The air grew colder, the fire burning dimmer. "Maybe it still does," Nathan said with a weak smile. A few hours later, when the fire had died down to glowing embers, Claire woke to a sound that made her blood run cold. It was faint, but unmistakable. Someone crying. Not far away. A woman's voice, low and broken, carried through the trees. She sat up quickly, holding her breath. Nathan was asleep beside her. She unzipped the tent quietly, peering out into the night. The sound came again, clearer this time, sobbing from the direction of the creek. Claire's heart pounded. For a long moment, she told herself it wasn't real, just wind or an animal or the echo of her dreams. But then she heard her name. Claire. It was her mother's voice. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, every muscle in her body tense. Couldn't be. Her mother had been gone for nearly 15 years. She whispered her brother's name, shaking him awake. Nathan stirred groggily. What's wrong?" "Listen," she hissed. The crying was louder now, still coming from the creek, rhythmic, almost desperate. Nathan frowned, pushing himself up. "It's probably someone hurt," he said, though his tone was uncertain. Claire shook her head. "No, you heard it, didn't you? That voice." Nathan hesitated before answering. It sounded like her. They both stood in the cold, the forest stretching before them in endless shadows. The crying continued, a haunting melody that rose and fell with the sound of the water. Without speaking, they began walking toward it. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. The light of their flashlights wavered, beams slicing through fog that had appeared from nowhere. The trees seemed to close in, branches knotted like hands reaching toward them. When they reached the creek, the sound of crying stopped. The water was still and dark, reflecting the pale moon. Claire crouched by the bank, scanning the surface. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice trembled. Nathan aimed his flashlight across the water. And there, just beyond the opposite bank, they saw her. A figure stood half-shrouded in mist, wearing the same denim jacket their mother had worn the night she died. Her hair hung damp over her face, her posture slightly slumped. "Mom!" Nathan called out, voice breaking. The figure lifted its head slowly. What they saw next froze them where they stood. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, but her mouth curved into a soft, familiar smile. She raised one trembling hand, beckoning them closer. Claire took a step forward, tears welling in her eyes. "It's her," she whispered. Nathan grabbed her arm. "No, it's not." But then the voice came again, exactly as they remembered, the same tone, the same warmth. "It's all right, sweetheart. Come here." Claire pulled away, stepping closer to the edge of the creek. The water shimmered unnaturally, the reflection rippling like liquid glass. Nathan shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She was only a few feet from the edge when the figure across the water moved suddenly, jerking forward like a puppet on invisible strings. Its face twisted, stretching unnaturally wide, the soft smile breaking into a gaping, silent scream. The sound that followed wasn't human. It was deep, echoing, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Claire stumbled back, falling into Nathan's arms. The flashlight flickered wildly, catching glimpses of the thing as it began to dissolve into mist, sinking into the water without a splash. The forest went still again. No wind, no crying, just the faint ripple of the creek, as if nothing had happened. Nathan's chest heaved. "We're leaving," he said firmly. Claire didn't argue. They stumbled back through the woods, hearts racing, branches clawing at their clothes. When they finally reached the campsite, the fire pit was cold, but something was waiting. Their tent was unzipped. Inside, the sleeping bags were soaked, as if someone had dragged them into the creek and laid them back again. On the ground between the two bags lay a small, familiar object. Their mother's old locket, tarnished but unmistakable. Claire picked it up with trembling hands, flipping it open. Inside was the photo of their family, except now, two more figures stood behind them, faces blurred, eyes dark. Nathan backed away, shaking his head. "We have to go," he whispered, voice cracking. Claire didn't move. She stared at the photo as tears streamed down her cheeks. "She found us," she whispered. As they drove away before dawn, the forest watched in silence. The creek shimmered faintly in the moonlight, rippling once, and from its depths, the faint sound of crying began again. The storm had been building for hours, grumbling low across the horizon like something ancient waking from sleep. By the time Evan and his two friends reached the ranger outpost, the rain was falling in slow, deliberate sheets, heavy enough to blur the treeline into ghostly silhouettes. Their flashlights barely cut through the downpour, the beams flickering as if the batteries themselves were afraid. They'd come out here for a weekend hike. Nothing extreme, just a quick escape from city noise. But now the forest seemed to have swallowed every sign of the world they'd left behind. No cell service, no map signal, no way to tell how far they'd wandered off the trail. The cabin appeared out of nowhere, a squat wooden shape half hidden by vines and fog. Its windows were black, its roof sagging under decades of neglect. "You think it's abandoned?" Evan asked, wiping water from his eyes. "Looks that way," said Ryan, the tallest of the three, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. Maya stood behind them, her hood drawn tight, her breath visible in the cold air. "We don't have much of a choice," she murmured. "We'll freeze out here." The door creaked as Evan pushed it open. The smell hit them first, Rot and damp wood, old smoke, and something faintly metallic. Inside, the darkness was thick, broken only by the stutter of lightning through cracked windows. Dust floated in the air like ash. The floorboards groaned under their weight, but the place seemed intact enough to offer shelter. They found an old lantern on a table and managed to light it, the flame casting a trembling halo around the room. Faded maps covered one wall, their ink bled by water stains. A ranger's jacket hung from a nail by the door, still holding the shape of its last owner. They set up near the center of the room, laying their packs down and shaking off the rain. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling through gaps in the wood. The lantern flame flickered violently, throwing shadows that stretched unnaturally long across the walls. Evan ran his hand over a nearby logbook on the table. Its pages were swollen with moisture, but he could still make out faint writing, the last dated entry from 1993. "Strange," he murmured, scanning the words. "It says they evacuated this station after a missing persons case." Maya's head snapped up. "Missing who?" Evan squinted. "Doesn't say. Just that they never found them." Ryan gave a nervous laugh. "Great. Let's spend the night in the one place where people disappear." But the truth was, there wasn't anywhere else to go. The storm outside was a living wall of rain and noise, shaking the old cabin with each gust. They decided to wait it out. Hours passed. The wind didn't ease. Evan dozed off against the wall, his head nodding with exhaustion. Maya sat near the window, staring into the storm. Occasionally, lightning illuminated the forest. Flashes of trees, trunks glistening like bones, the brief suggestion of movement between them. She told herself it was her imagination. Then, around midnight, she saw it again. Something was standing among the trees. A tall, lean shape, motionless, facing the cabin. The flash came and went, and when darkness returned, she couldn't tell if it was still there. Her pulse quickened. She leaned closer to the glass, straining her eyes. Another flash, and this time the figure was closer. She gasped, stepping back from the window. "Evan," she whispered sharply. "Wake up." He stirred, groggy. "What's wrong?" "There's someone out there." Ryan joined her at the window, squinting. "I don't see anything." But the next bolt of lightning cut across the sky, and for the briefest instant, they all saw it. A pale shape just beyond the treeline, tall enough that its head brushed the lower branches. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. "It's probably a tree," Ryan said quickly, stepping back. But even as he spoke, a hollow sound echoed through the storm. Knock, knock, knock. They froze. The sound came again, slow and deliberate, like someone rapping on the outer wall with the back of their hand. Knock, knock, knock. The three of them exchanged terrified glances. Evan grabbed the lantern and moved toward the door, his voice shaking. Maybe it's another hiker. But when he opened it, there was nothing. The rain lashed against him, cold and relentless, but no one was there. He stepped out, sweeping the light across the clearing. "Hello!" The woods answered with silence. Then, from deep within the trees, came a faint whisper carried by the wind. A voice sang his name. "Evan!" He turned, but the sound was gone. He stumbled back inside, slamming the door. "We're not alone," he said. The knocking started again immediately, faster this time, circling the cabin. It came from every wall at once, a chaotic rhythm of fists or something pretending to have them. The lantern flickered wildly, shadows twisting into shapes that looked too human to be coincidence. Maya covered her ears, tears streaming down her face. "Make it stop!" Ryan grabbed a rusted hatchet from the wall, holding it out with trembling hands. "If it's a person, they're trying to scare us." The knocking suddenly ceased. The silence was so complete it pressed on their eardrums. Then came a soft scraping from above, slow, dragging steps across the roof. All three looked up in unison. The sound crept from one end of the cabin to the other, pausing directly over them. A droplet of something dark fell from the ceiling onto the lantern glass, hissing as it hit. Lightning flashed again, and this time the windows filled with faces. Pale, hollow-eyed, pressed against the glass from the outside, dozens of them staring inward. Their expressions were blank, their mouths open in silent screams. The lantern shattered, plunging the room into black. Evan grabbed Maya's hand. "The back door!" he shouted. They ran, crashing through debris as thunder roared above. Ryan was right behind them, but when they burst into the storm, only two made it out. They turned back, calling for him, their voices lost in the wind. For a moment, they saw his flashlight beam flicker through the doorway. Then a sudden, violent tug, and the light went out. His scream was swallowed by the storm. They ran until their legs gave out, collapsing beneath a massive pine. The rain was relentless, the air thick with electricity and fear. Neither spoke. The storm began to ease just before dawn, leaving the forest eerily still. When the light returned, they made their way back to the cabin. The door hung open, hinges torn. Inside, the floor was covered in mud and footprints. Not one or two, but dozens, circling the spot where Ryan had stood last. On the table, the old ranger's logbook lay open again, though none of them had touched it. A new line had been added, written in fresh, wet ink. Another lost to the storm. The forest keeps its own. Evan slammed the book shut, his voice breaking. "We're leaving, now." As they stumbled away down the overgrown trail, the wind picked up again, soft, whispering through the trees, carrying what sounded almost like laughter. When they reached the road hours later, exhausted and mud-soaked, a ranger truck was waiting. The officer inside looked confused when they told their story. "That station's been abandoned since the early 90s, he said. "Burned down in a lightning fire." He paused, watching their pale faces. "You sure you didn't just imagine it?" Maya didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the treeline. In the soft light of morning, she could just make out a figure standing between the trees, tall, still, and watching. The next story unfolded under a sky so full of stars it felt unreal. A deceptive calm masking the dread that waited beneath. Tyler and his girlfriend Jenna had been driving for hours, chasing solitude, hoping to escape the noise of the city and the weight of a failing relationship. Their plan was simple. One last camping trip, far from everything, to see if there was anything left between them worth saving. The forest they chose was deep and unmarked on most maps, the kind of place where GPS falters and the world goes quiet. They arrived just before midnight, headlights slicing through the mist that hugged the ground. The road ended at a clearing, a wide, circular space ringed by towering spruce trees that looked older than memory itself. Tyler killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt almost hostile. Jenna looked out the window, frowning. "It's too quiet," she said softly. He laughed it off, trying to sound confident. "That's the point, remember? No distractions, no noise." They set up camp by flashlight. The air was sharp, filled with the earthy scent of moss and wet bark. When the tent was up and the fire crackled to life, they sat across from each other, the flames painting their faces in gold and shadow. It was awkward at first. Every laugh felt forced, every silence too long. But as the fire warmed them, the tension began to ease. Tyler poured whiskey into metal cups, and for a little while they pretended things were normal again. At one point, Jenna looked toward the forest and said, almost dreamily, "You know, it's strange. I don't hear anything. No crickets, no frogs. Nothing." Tyler shrugged, though unease rippled through him. The stillness was absolute. Not peaceful, but expectant. Even the fire seemed to burn too quietly. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that primal awareness that something wasn't right. As the night deepened, the forest pressed closer. The fire began to die, its glow shrinking into embers. Tyler got up to gather more wood, but Jenna caught his wrist. "Don't go too far," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I'll be right back." He grabbed the flashlight and walked into the trees. The beam of light cut through fog that seemed to thicken with every step. The trees here grew closer together, their trunks warped and slick with moisture. The ground was soft, covered in fallen needles and something else, a faint metallic smell that clung to the air. He found a few branches and turned back, but stopped when he noticed something half-buried near the base of a tree. It looked like a wooden carving, small and crude, shaped like a human figure with no face. Curious, he picked it up. It was sticky to the touch, dark residue coating its surface. He frowned, dropping it instantly. When he looked up, his flashlight flickered. In the dim pulse of light, he thought he saw movement. Something sliding between the trees, low to the ground and fast. "Hello?" he called out, forcing a nervous laugh. "Someone there?" The woods answered only with silence. He turned back toward camp, walking faster now. The air felt wrong, heavy, almost suffocating. The smell of rot was stronger. As he approached the clearing, his light caught something strange. There were footprints in the dirt near their tent. Not his, not Jenna's. Bare, elongated prints that seemed to drag slightly between steps. He froze. The fire had almost gone out, the embers glowing faintly. He called her name once, then again louder. No answer. "Jenna?" He rushed to the tent, unzipping it empty. Her backpack was there, her jacket still folded, her phone on the sleeping bag. He spun around, scanning the darkness. "Jenna!" he shouted. His voice cracked. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the woods, came a reply. "Tyler." It was her voice, but wrong. Too slow, too low. He took a step back. The voice came again, closer this time. "Tyler, come here." He shone the flashlight toward the sound, but it flickered, then died completely. In the pitch black, he heard something moving, wet, shuffling steps. Panic surged through him. He stumbled backward, his hand brushing against the fire pit. The faint light revealed a shape at the edge of the clearing, tall, thin, human-like but not quite right. Its arms hung too long, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, and from the darkness where its face should have been, he heard it breathe. "Tyler!" He bolted, crashing through the forest, branches slashing at his face. He ran blindly, tripping over roots, gasping for air. Behind him, the sound followed, the dragging, uneven steps, the labored breathing. He didn't dare look back. The forest was endless, every direction the same. Then he saw light dim and flickering and sprinted toward it. He burst into a smaller clearing, heart hammering, only to stop dead. The campfire was there. His tent, his backpack, everything exactly as it had been. He spun around in confusion. He had been running straight, but somehow he'd come back to where he started. His chest tightened with dread. The fire flared suddenly, as if fed by an unseen hand. And there, on the opposite side of the flames, stood Jenna. Relief flooded him until she smiled. It wasn't her smile. Her lips pulled back too far, her eyes completely black. Her skin looked damp, almost translucent. "You left me," she said. Her voice layered with something else beneath it, like several people speaking at once. Tyler stumbled backward, shaking his head. "No, you're not." Before he could finish, the thing moved, not walking, gliding impossibly fast. It was across the fire in a heartbeat, inches from him. The smell of decay filled the air. Its face twitched, the features shifting. Her face melting into his own reflection, then into nothing. It whispered, "The woods keep what they're given." He screamed, grabbing a burning branch and swinging wildly. The thing recoiled, retreating into the dark with a guttural hiss. Tyler ran again, not caring where he went, only that he was away. He didn't stop until dawn painted the sky gray and thin. When he finally stumbled onto a dirt road, he collapsed, gasping for breath, his clothes torn and soaked in dew. A passing truck found him hours later. The driver, an older man with tired eyes, pulled over and rushed to help. Tyler clutched the man's sleeve, his voice hoarse. "There's something in the woods. Took her. It looked like her." The driver didn't speak for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You're not the first to say that." The man helped him into the truck. As they drove away, Tyler looked back through the rear window. The clearing was still visible for a moment. His tent, the fire pit, the dark line of trees. Just before the forest vanished from view, he saw a figure standing at the edge, watching them leave. It was Jenna, or whatever was left of her. smiling faintly as the trees closed around her. That night, Tyler sat in a motel room, unable to sleep. When he finally looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, he froze. Around his neck, faint but unmistakable, were long, wet fingerprints, the same size as his own. The sun had already slipped behind the mountains when the group of 4 pulled into the remote campsite, their tires crunching over gravel that hadn't been touched in years. It was the last night of their week-long backpacking trip, and exhaustion had turned to relief. They were miles from the nearest town, surrounded by thick forest and jagged cliffs that loomed like watchful giants. The air was thin and cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke from their small fire. Laughter came easy again, the kind that only comes when people think they've made it safely through. There was Emma, the quiet one who always double-checked every compass reading. Josh, the joker who carried the speaker and kept morale high. Danny, their fearless leader, who seemed unshakable, and Malik, the newest addition to their group, who joined through a friend-of-a-friend invitation and hadn't spoken much since. He was polite, quiet, and observant, always watching the others with a small, unreadable smile. The fire crackled, sparks lifting into the growing darkness. Josh leaned back on his elbows, grinning. "Hard to believe we haven't seen another soul for days," he said. "Kind of nice, though, right?" Danny nodded, staring into the flames. "That's why I love it out here. The silence, the stars." Malik tilted his head slightly. "Sometimes silence means you're being listened to," he said softly. The others laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. He didn't. As the night deepened, the world grew unnaturally still. No wind, no rustle of leaves, no chirping insects. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. Emma felt it first, that prickling unease at the base of her neck. She looked around, scanning the tree line. "Anyone else feel like we're not alone?" she asked. Josh grinned, throwing another stick into the fire. "Don't start, Em. I've had enough ghost stories for one trip." But Danny's brow furrowed. "She's right. It's too quiet." Malik didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the dark beyond the firelight, unblinking. The others followed his stare but saw nothing. For a while, no one spoke. Then, faintly, came a sound. A rhythmic clicking, almost like stones tapping together. Came from the trees, far away at first, then closer, deliberate. Josh chuckled nervously. Probably just a deer. The sound stopped immediately, as if it had heard him. Then came another noise. Whispering, low and impossible to locate. Danny grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the woods. The beam caught movement, something tall, human-shaped, standing half behind a tree. She froze. "Who's there?" she called. No answer, just the soft crack of branches shifting under weight. Emma's breathing quickened. "We should go inside the tents," she whispered. Malik shook his head slowly, eyes still on the dark. "No," he said, his voice low. "It won't help." Lightning flashed far away, painting the forest in brief, pale light, and in that moment they saw it clearly. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, tall and impossibly thin. Its skin gray and stretched like paper. It moved in jerks, as though pulled by strings. Its head was tilted, its mouth opening and closing in silence. The light vanished, plunging them back into darkness. Emma screamed. Josh stumbled to his feet, grabbing for the axe by the fire. "What the hell is that?" The whispering grew louder, layered voices speaking over one another in languages none of them understood. Danny shouted for everyone to get in the car. They scrambled toward it, tripping over roots and gear. But when Josh reached the driver's side, he stopped dead. The windshield was covered in handprints, hundreds of them, pressed from the inside. Emma began sobbing, clutching Danny's arm. "We didn't lock it like that. We didn't." Her words died as the whispers stopped. Total silence. Malik stood a few feet away, perfectly calm, his face expressionless. "It's too late to leave," he said. Danny turned on him. "What are you talking about?" He smiled faintly, that same unreadable expression he'd worn all week. "They don't let people leave once they've been seen." A shadow passed behind him, massive, silent, gliding just beyond the edge of the firelight. The trees seemed to bend inward as if drawn toward something. Malik didn't flinch. His voice grew softer, almost reverent. "I told you the forest listens." Then came the sound. Not a scream, not human. A deep, guttural roar that shook the ground. The fire exploded outward, scattering embers into the night. In the chaos, Emma fell, Danny reaching for her. But something in the dark grabbed her leg and dragged her toward the trees. Her screams tore through the night, then cut off sharply. Josh swung the axe blindly, hitting nothing but air. Malik didn't move. He was watching the tree lean, whispering something too quiet to hear. When the light from the fire faded, Josh and Emma ran. They didn't stop to look back. The forest swallowed them whole, branches tearing at their clothes, the whispers chasing them through the dark. They didn't notice that the sound of footsteps behind them didn't match their own. Heavier, slower, deliberate. When they reached a cliffside clearing, they stopped to catch their breath. The moonlight spilled over the valley below, silver and cold. Josh turned to Emma. "We'll wait for sunrise. Then we'll find the road." But Emma was staring past him, her face pale. He followed her gaze and froze. Malik stood on the opposite side of the clearing, smiling in the moonlight. His clothes were clean, untouched. "You shouldn't have run," he said softly. "It doesn't like that." Behind him, something moved, impossibly tall, its shape shifting with the mist, limbs too long, face hidden in shadow. Malik looked up at it with something like devotion. "It found us," he whispered. "Now it will take what it's owed." The creature moved forward, silent and fluid, the air thickening around it. Emma screamed as Josh grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the trees, but the ground beneath them gave way. They tumbled down a slope, crashing through brush and stone until everything went black. When Emma opened her eyes, dawn was breaking. She was lying at the base of the cliff, alone. Her leg was twisted, pain blinding. Josh was nowhere to be seen. The forest was quiet again, sunlight filtering through the leaves like gold dust. She dragged herself to her feet, calling his name, her voice hoarse. There was no answer. Then she saw him, far up the slope, standing among the trees, Josh motionless, facing her. Relief washed over her, until she noticed something wrong with the way he stood. His arms hung at odd angles, and his head tilted too far to one side, just like the thing they'd seen. He didn't move, didn't blink. Slowly, his mouth opened, and from it came a faint clicking sound. Emma's scream echoed through the morning air, scattering birds into flight. She turned and limped away, every step agony, until she reached the dirt road hours later. A ranger found her there, dehydrated and in shock. When they went back to search for the others, there was no sign of the campsite. No tents, no fire pit. Only a ring of blackened earth and hundreds of small wooden carvings buried in the soil, each shaped like a human figure with no face. In the official report, they called it a hiking accident. A rock slide, they said, but the ranger who found her still tells the story differently. He says when he carried Emma out of the woods, she wouldn't stop whispering the same words over and over, eyes wide with terror. They were listening. They're still listening. Days turned into weeks after Emma's rescue, yet the horrors of that night clung to her like a shadow that refused to fade. The hospital walls felt too white, too sterile, a false safety. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the forest again, smelled the pine and smoke, heard that faint clicking echoing through the silence. Doctors said she was lucky to be alive, but Emma didn't feel lucky. Her body healed, but her mind refused to forget. She told them about Malik, about the creature, about the whispers that surrounded them. They listened, nodded, and wrote severe trauma and hallucinations in her chart. But she knew what she saw was real. At night, when the nurses turned off the lights and the corridors went quiet, Emma heard it again, the clicking. Soft, rhythmic, coming from somewhere down the hall. The first time, she thought it was the 4 machine. The second time, she pulled the covers over her head and prayed it would stop. On the third night, she saw movement in the reflection of the window. Something tall, standing at the far end of the corridor, its head tilted, watching her. When the nurse came to check on her, the shadow vanished, leaving only muddy footprints by the door. They moved her to a psychiatric facility on the outskirts of town, a quiet place surrounded by hills and fog. She spent her days in therapy, sketching fragments of the forest, twisted trees, faceless figures, the hollow eyes of Malik. The other patients avoided her, whispering that she talked in her sleep, repeating strange phrases in a language no one understood. The doctors thought she was reliving trauma, but Emma began to notice something. The more she drew, the more real it felt. Some nights she'd wake to find her sketches gone, replaced with new drawings she didn't remember making. One morning, a new doctor arrived. Dr. Lane, calm and kind, who told her he believed her story. Sometimes, he said, the things we see out there are older than memory. The forest has ways of choosing who remembers. His words unsettled her, but his voice was soothing. He asked her to show him where it happened, to take him to the site once she was well enough. She hesitated but agreed. Part of her wanted closure. Another part, the one that woke screaming every night, told her not to go back. When the day came, the sky was gray and heavy with mist. The forest seemed alive again, breathing, waiting. They parked near the trailhead, where the ranger had first found her. Everything looked the same, yet different. The air was colder, the silence thicker. As they hiked deeper, Emma began to tremble. The trees leaned close, their branches creaking like whispers. "It's here," she said finally, stopping near a patch of scorched earth. The ground was littered with tiny wooden figures, fresh ones newly carved. Dr. Lane knelt to pick one up. "Fascinating," he murmured. "They've been watching." Emma stepped back, heart pounding. "What do you mean, watching?" she asked, but he didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the figure in his hand. Slowly, he began to hum, the same low rhythm she'd heard in her dreams. The forest stirred, wind rushing through the trees though the air had been still seconds before. "You shouldn't have come back," a voice whispered. Not his, not hers, but all around them. Emma turned and ran, branches tearing at her clothes, the ground soft beneath her feet as if trying to pull her under. Behind her, she heard Dr. Lane laughing, a deep, inhuman sound that didn't belong to him. When she reached the clearing, she stopped dead. The car was gone. In its place stood Malik, smiling faintly, hands clasped behind his back as if waiting for her. "You didn't escape," he said softly. "You were chosen." His voice echoed, overlapping with others, hundreds of voices speaking as one. Emma stumbled backward, shaking her head. "You're dead," she whispered. He smiled wider. "So are you." The ground beneath her cracked open, and the smell of earth and rot filled the air. From the shadows emerged shapes, tall, thin, faceless, surrounding her in a perfect circle. They swayed with the wind, whispering words she couldn't understand, their voices blending into a haunting rhythm. Malik stepped closer, placing his cold hand on her shoulder. "They never stopped listening," he said. As the forest closed around her, Emma screamed. A sound swallowed by the wind, carried into the trees. The whispering grew louder until it was all there was. Then silence. When the rangers returned days later, they found no trace of her or Dr. Lane. Only her sketchbook remained, lying open on the ground. On the last page, drawn in frantic, dark lines, was a figure standing among trees, tall, faceless, and listening. The rain began just after dusk, a slow drizzle that turned the dirt paths into black rivers of mud. A group of friends, Liam, Arya, Ben, and Chloe, huddled under a worn tarp near the dying campfire, their laughter forced, the night pressing and heavy around them. They'd heard the stories about these woods, but they came anyway. It was supposed to be their last trip together before college. One final adventure. Liam had found the location online, an unnamed patch of wilderness said to be untouched by time. It was isolated, silent, and endless. Perfect, he thought. As the fire crackled, Ben teased Arya for checking her phone, even though there was no signal. You really think Instagram will save you out here? He joked. She rolled her eyes, shivering. I just don't like how quiet it is. Even animals don't make a sound. Her voice trembled slightly, and Chloe laughed, though it sounded nervous. It's fine. It's just nature, right? But deep down they all felt it, the wrongness. The stillness too complete, the shadows too thick. When the rain grew heavier, they retreated into their tent. The sound on the canvas was steady, hypnotic, almost comforting. Until it wasn't. Somewhere in the distance, beneath the rain's rhythm, came another sound. Faint, deliberate. A single tapping like something knocking on wood. 3 taps. Then silence. Liam froze mid-sentence. Did you hear that? He whispered. No one answered. They waited. Another 3 taps, closer this time. Chloe gripped Ben's arm. It's probably just water, he muttered, though his voice shook. Liam grabbed his flashlight and unzipped the tent. Stay here. He stepped out, the beam slicing through the sheets of rain. The forest glistened under the weak light, wet and endless. The tapping stopped. He turned slowly, heart pounding. Nothing but trees. Then movement. A figure standing just beyond the light's edge, motionless. Hello? He called out. The figure didn't move. He took one hesitant step forward. The light flickered. The figure was gone. He ran back to the tent, breathless. There's someone out there, he said. Ben laughed nervously. A hiker? A ranger? But Arya shook her head. No one hikes out here. We're miles from any trail. Her voice broke on the last word. They sat in silence for a while, listening. Then, from somewhere behind the tent, came the tapping again, this time against the fabric itself. 3 slow knocks. The tent wall trembled slightly, as if touched from outside. Chloe screamed, and Liam shouted, Who's there? No reply, only the sound of rain and the faintest whisper of movement. Ben, trying to be brave, unzipped the tent and stepped out, flashlight raised. It's probably a raccoon, he said, forcing a laugh. But his voice died in his throat when the beam caught something hanging from a tree. A wooden carving, human-shaped, faceless, dripping wet. Beneath it, written in mud, was a single word. Listen. He stumbled back, tripping over a root. The others rushed out, flashlights shaking in their hands. Around them, dozens of carvings hung from branches, swaying gently in the wind. The tapping started again, all around now, echoing from every direction. Tap, tap, tap. It grew louder, faster, until it became a deafening rhythm, like hundreds of hands drumming against the earth. Chloe screamed and ran toward the trees. We have to get out, she shouted. Liam chased after her, but the darkness swallowed them. The rain turned torrential, lightning flashing across the sky, revealing shapes moving between the trees, tall, twisted, too fast to be human. Arya fell to her knees, covering her ears, whispering over and over, Make it stop. When dawn came, the storm was gone. The forest was silent again. Rangers found the campsite days later. Tents ripped open, belongings scattered. Only one person was found, Arya, sitting by the extinguished fire, staring into nothing. Her hair was matted, her hands covered in mud. When they asked her what happened, she whispered, It told us to listen. Then she smiled, slow and empty, and began tapping on the table, 3 soft knocks, perfectly spaced. The narrator's voice softens, the final echoes fading into the hum of the night. The stories end, but the silence that follows feels heavier than before, as if the darkness itself is listening. The woods, they say, are patient. They remember every scream, every secret buried beneath the roots. Somewhere, deep between those trees, fires still flicker and voices still call out for help that never comes. Maybe you'll hear them one night, a whisper on the wind, your name spoken softly from the shadows. If you do, don't answer. Just keep walking, and never look back. The 12th and final story wasn't a legend or a rumor, it was a warning. A ranger's journal, found sealed in a weathered box near a burned-out watchtower deep in the Oregon wilderness. The last entry was dated October 31st, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. They move with the fog. They remember the ones who listen. Beneath the words was a list of names, 12 in total, every one belonging to a missing camper from the surrounding region. Locals say on nights like that one, when the forest breathes cold and the mist crawls low across the ground, the trees whisper those names again. The wind carries them softly, like a prayer or a curse. Some hikers claim they've seen lanterns swaying between the trees, faint, golden lights that vanish the moment you try to follow. Others have recorded voices calling from the darkness, repeating their own names back to them. No one knows who or what the ranger saw that night, only that his final words still linger, carved into the tower's remains. The forest never forgets, and it never lets go. And when the night is still enough, you can almost hear it remembering.